As we start chapter 12, let's begin by thinking about our sexual values and how those sexual values may influence the decisions we make about who and what we are, how we're going to view our bodies, how we're going to relate to others. So early in the semester, we started by talking about values and some of Rice's work. And Rice talked about announced values and committed values. And that's certainly something also that we saw in Ebal Patou's article. And one of the things that you saw there is how values and behaviors can come into conflict. Now, there are a number of things that influence our sexual behavior. These include biology, social factors such as history of abuse, peer pressure, peer norms, cultural norms, scripts like what it means to be romantic or a good girl or a bad boy, and environmental factors such as alcohol. So let's look at some of the kinds of things that may influence our views on these issues. And certainly Victoria's Secret is one place to start. Or, what kinds of messages does a Kardashian family have to say to us? This is a push-up bra designed for 7-year-olds. What does that say to a 7-year-old when given something like this? Now, clothing takes all sorts of different forms, and I think that we need to be aware that the messages are often much more complicated than what we initially see or initially think about. So, for example, some women argue vehemently that they should be allowed to decide who sees their body, and that wearing the hijab or a burqa gives them choice. And some men feel very masculine wearing a kilt. And these little boys, or these boys, argued that they should have the right to wear a skirt to school in very hot weather. Okay, I guess I can't hear any of that. Hello. As we're starting chapter 12, let's start by thinking about sexual values and the roles that those have in our lives. So we started the semester by looking at values and how we may talk some values, but not necessarily put them in action. We talked about that difference between announced and committed. Rice talks about that, and then in Patou's article, you also see that. This conflict between values and behavior, how we may believe something and yet not act on it. So let's think about some of the things that influence our behavior. These include biology, social factors such as our history of abuse, peer pressure, peer norms, cultural norms, the scripts that there are for what it means to be romantic or a good girl or a bad boy, and how those influence what we choose, and environmental factors, such as alcohol or the setting. Good place to start is with by thinking about what messages are sent by Victoria's Secret or by the Kardashians? What are they saying about what sexy is, what it means to be female, what it means to be a member of our culture? This is from an ad for a push-up bikini top aimed at 7-year-olds. And what does that say to 7-year-olds and to their parents? Now, as we're talking about sexual values, recognize that there are a whole range of different kinds of sexual values, and that we shouldn't take it as neatly as one thing or the other. So, for example, while some people look at burqas and hijabs as restrictive for women, some women argue that they should have the right to decide who looks at their body, and that they feel more free wearing a hijab or a burqa than when they're not. Some men argue similarly that they should be allowed to wear a kilt. And these boys argued that during a warm or late spring day, that they should be allowed to wear skirts. We get messages when we're standing in the grocery line and we see a Cosmo cover, or when we're watching Queer Eye, or even just see it on Netflix. We get messages about sexuality as we're talking about, as we're seeing messages of sexual harassment, for example. And on the one hand, this may both be seen as cool in some ways and also repulsive. And people can have both sets of reactions to the same kind of stimulus. These views or these influences come from a variety of different settings. So, for example, there have been a large number of Catholic priests that have had accusations about them being about sexual abuse. It does not seem that there are more Catholic priests that are abusing than other professions. On the other hand, that abuse by a religious figure can really impact that person's view of themselves and their religion and God. But there are a range of messages about abstinence, messages, encouraging people to take vows of purity. And let me just say, purity vows do not appear to be effective ways of decreasing or increasing abstinence or decreasing rates of pregnancy. If we look at Barbie's figure is very disproportionate. The figure on the right is actually probably a more typical 19-year-old body. What messages are we sending little girls who play with dolls like Bratz dolls? And yet we're also seeing dolls helping babies understand pregnancy. We get varying kinds of messages from Disney. Messages about one true prince, one true love, being demure, and that's, demure and passive, and that's a way to find love. Hector is here wondering about being a good boy, and that he doesn't want to be a good boy, that girls like bad boys. And he wonders about how he got that reputation. And Jeremy says, "What have you ever done that was bad? This morning I threw my gum in the waste paper basket without wrapping it in paper first." There are messages, trying to help people make decisions about what a date is, what they can, should, want to, choose to do with their body. Obviously, our friends influence what we decide, and our families. We certainly watch our families closely to see how they feel about sex, what they talk about, what they don't talk about, how they talk about those things, and what they also do. Now, as we think about this, there are all these different influences: media, friends, schools, parents, religion, culture, that influence our personal values, and that from there influence our behavior, along with peer pressure and the situation and perceived costs and benefits. So it's not a simple story, but one that we should be aware of what kinds of things we're being exposed to, what kinds of things we're thinking about. And we'll go from there. Take care. See you in our next video. Bye-bye.